Okay, so we just talked about price ceilings, now we're gonna talk about price floors and quotas, all right? Now, price floors, again, you typically think of the price floor being down there, below equilibrium. And theoretically, you may put a price floor anywhere you want. But in order for a price floor to be effective, to be binding, the price floor has to go where you wouldn't normally think a floor would be, above equilibrium, all right? So we have a price floor as the lowest limit that a price could go. See, in this case, we are above equilibrium. The market wants to bring this down to equilibrium, but it can't because it's being mandated by the government, okay? Example would be sugar, butter. Minimum wage also is a type of price floor, okay? We get in, if this was an on-campus class, we've spent many of my classes debate that for quite a while. The the advantages, disadvantages of the minimum wage. But minimum wage is a type of price floor. And what it is saying is that the price cannot go below the floor, all right? Now, in this country, we pay about double what the world price of sugar is, all right? And you say, well, gee, why is that? Well, why is that is because if you go to Washington, D.C. and you go down K Street, you're going to see some beautiful office buildings with very, very nice offices. And those were a lot, that areas were a lot of lobbyists. Because when I was in Washington, I would go there, a lot of lobbyists locate there. And the lobbyists for different industries go in, and they're somewhat like salespeople. They go in, but they're calling on, senators and congressmen and their aides, all right? And they're trying to promote their industry. So the sugar lobby has done a very good job in keeping the price of sugar high in this country. To the extent that we paid about double what the world price is for sugar. So that being the case, we are going to have somewhat of a binding price floor above equilibrium. But let's we'll talk about butter as an example. If this was the graph for butter, we look at it and say, okay, and again, I'm just using this as an example, don't say it doesn't cost that. If we're looking at butter, we're saying it's $1 a pound, all right? And that's the equilibrium price. At $1 a pound, we have an equilibrium price or quantity of 20 million pounds of butter being bought, okay? However, if we have a price floor above equilibrium at, let's say, $1.50, what happens? Well, in the old scenario, we say, well, that's easy. We have suppliers are real happy. They're going to supply all the way out here. But we as demanders, we're not so happy. We're cutting back to here. And in the case of a price floor, you typically say, well, we have a huge surplus, all right? Well, in this scenario, what happens is, guess who buys the surplus? The government. And whether it's butter or other goods in Europe, they have many price floors, and oftentimes what the government will do, they'll buy up the surplus, okay, and they'll dump it on some foreign market at pennies on the dollar, all right? So again, what happens? We have an equilibrium price of $1, equilibrium quantity of 20 million pounds or 20 million pounds. So we've got the surplus that the government ends up buying. So, are there any inefficiencies? Yes, there are. You're going to need to remember them. There's basically 5. All right. Now, here we have inefficiently low quantity demand it, all right? Now, because the price is high, it's way back to here. So the demand is way back there. But in this case, the government picks up the slack, okay? Now, number two, inefficient allocation of sales among sellers. What does that mean? Well, it means that we are allowing, by allowing this price floor to be way up here, we are allowing certain inefficient sellers to produce product. In other words, we should be at this level, all right? But with the price floor, we are allowing these suppliers, all these rather inefficient suppliers, to produce all the way up to $1.50, okay? So that is considered, you're allocating sales to sellers, these sellers, who are not efficient, all right? So that's the inefficiency there, okay? Three, wasted resources. Well, you know, we see that the government will have to pick up the slack, buy up. Sometimes they will just dump the product. Sometimes it's put to a good use. For instance, in the dairy industry, government will turn that dairy into in cheese, and perhaps you've seen it in some of the schools in the poor neighborhoods in the country. They'll be shipping them big blocks of government cheese. Okay, well that's from the government buying up the excess dairy. Okay, so at least it's going for some good. All right, now inefficiently high quality. All right, this is an interesting one. Inefficiently high quality. Now, if we have a price floor way up here, and you can't go below the floor, remember, okay? So what's happening? Well, what's happening is you and I, as let's say we were competitors, we typically would try to compete on quality naturally, but we would certainly try to compete with each other on price. And an example would be going back to before the airlines were deregulated, when the airlines were regulated. For instance, in the late 50s, early 60s, taking an airplane ride was a big deal. I mean, you know, you got dressed up, you put a suit on, it was a big deal. And when you went on an airplane ride, wow, you got service that was unbelievable. You had Pan American Airlines. Some of you have heard of it, some of you hadn't, but it was a tremendous airlines, you know, that's, you know, scanned the globe. It gave you unbelievable service. As a matter of fact, Pan American, they had their meals brought in from Maxine's of Paris. So, you know, that's a pretty high level of food. You would be getting linen tablecloths, perhaps crystal goblets to put your wine in. And you're saying, wow, that is a tremendous amount of things that we really don't need. I mean, they're nice, but that's all the airlines could do to compete with one another, because they couldn't compete with price, because we had this price floor already set. So if you can't compete against price, you're going to kill them with all these other perks, okay? And that's basically what they did for the longest time, all right? Now you go on an airplane and you maybe get thrown a bag of peanuts or something, okay? So that would be, did you need your meal to be catered from Maxine's of Paris? No, probably not. You would like maybe something decent to eat or a drink or something, but that would be a little excessive, okay? So we label that as inefficiently high quality, all right? And then there's black markets, you know, they unload some of this excess product. They may sell it, you know, in the black market here or there. Basically, just illegal activities, okay? So, and remember what we talked about? We have our lines drawn here, but the more time, the more elastic. So these will flatten out to here. So if we have a bad situation now, given more and more time, if nothing changes, typically the situation just gets worse, okay? All right, the last one we're going to talk about is not a price control, but a quantity control. Quotas, all right? Government regulation of the quantity sold, okay? Now, back in the, what do you call them, the good old days or the bad old days, in the 50s and in the 60s, when the big three, Ford, GM, and Chrysler, and the little sister American Motors, they had pretty much the American car market. But then we started noticing back in the 1970s, boy, these cars with these funny names, Toyota or Honda, or, you know, occasionally we would see the Volkswagen Beetle, but that was just kind of a novelty car. But through the 70s, these cars that the big three and American Motors, you know, weren't used to seeing. They were seeing more and more and more of them, all right? So all of a sudden, you know, the American car companies were realizing that foreign countries, car companies were coming in and taking up a fairly significant share of the market. So what they did was they went to the government and they said, hey, something's got to happen. Now, government has a couple of tools to address this. They could throw a tax on imports, which is called a tariff, all right? Typically, tariffs get a lot of bad press, and governments tend to try to avoid those if possible. The other one is a quota, all right? We're not saying we're going to put a $400 tax on your car, but guess what? We're only going to allow so many Japanese cars or whatever, foreign cars into our market. Now, Japan saw the writing on the wall, so they said, all right, don't put the quota in, but it was a quota. We are going to offer a voluntary quota. We will voluntarily limit the amount of number of cars we ship to the United States. Well, you know, if they hadn't done it, the United States government was just about to. So what happened there? Well, again, similar to a ceiling or a floor. You can put a quota anywhere you want, but now we're going either right or left. You can put a quota anywhere you want, but to be binding, a quota has to go to the left, obviously less of equilibrium, okay? So let's say the market, the folks in the United States in the late 70s, early 80s, they wanted about 3 million Japanese cars, all right? Well, now you can put the quota at 5 million, but it's not going to do anything. It's going to be non-binding because we only want 3 million. But if the quota goes down to 1.8 million, well, what happens? Well, again, you have this dead weight loss, okay? And we have the car companies were doing very well. Ended up, as a result of these quotas, the American car buying public paid about $5 billion more in total for the cars, and the big three, they pocketed about $10 billion through this quota, okay? Now, again, instead of the market trying to go down or trying to go up, in this case, it's trying to go over to equilibrium, but it can't because there is a quota. And basically, the two problems with that is dead weight loss, because nobody gets it because those cars are not being bought or sold. We're at 1.8, and illegal activities. You know, they'll do anything from try to put some miles on the car to claim that they're not brand new, or car dealers, and they did do this, they would have just a certain number of cars, and salespeople would be taking money that was not recorded on the books. There's just a whole list of illegal activities that can result from these types of quotas, all right? And that is basically it. Now, I'm going to be putting up another review for the first exam video, and we'll go over all the key points to it. And again, I apologize for the emails, but I will be getting back to all of you. And that's about it for today's lesson. But we will be doing one review before the exam. All right? So everybody, you have a great day.